The room gave up on the soldier. The surgeon froze. But in the corner, a woman who spent months scrubbing floors just snapped on her gloves. She didn't ask for permission. She gave an order. Because today, the ghost is going back to war. The heart monitor at Riverbend Central wasn't just beeping. It was a rhythmic scream, a flatline echoing through the trauma bay like a final judgment. Dr. Julian Vance froze. The scalpel in his hand, usually an extension of his massive ego, was now nothing more than a piece of cold steel. He was outmatched. The catastrophic internal bleeding of the young Marine on the table was a puzzle his expensive education couldn't solve. The staff stood back. They watched the life drain out of the young soldier, their faces masks of inevitable. Everyone, except for the quiet, middle-aged nurse in the corner, the one who had spent the last 3 months changing bedpans and being ignored. Elias Thorne, that was the name on the soldiers' dog tags, but to the woman stepping forward, he wasn't just a patient, he was a brother in arms. She didn't look at the monitors, she looked at the wound. With a precision that was terrifying to behold, she snapped on fresh gloves. She didn't ask the doctor for a seat at the table, she commanded the room. In that split second, the air in the hospital changed. They weren't looking at a nurse anymore, they were looking at a ghost from the sandbox. Riverbend Central, tucked away in the rainy, grey outskirts of Portland, was a place where careers went to settle, not to soar. It was clean, bureaucratic, and utterly boring. For Elena Vance, that was exactly the point. At 42, Elena was the definition of unremarkable. She wore scrubs 2 sizes too large, hiding a frame that was wiry and built like a weapon. Her hair, streaked with premature grey, was pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was the invisible one, the one you called to clean up vomit in the waiting room, the one you blamed when the supply closet was low on IV catheters. Vance, I asked for the chart on bed 4, not bed 5. Can you read, or are you just as slow as you look? The voice belonged to Dr. Julian Vance. He was 35, handsome in a way that he never let anyone forget, and possessed the kind of arrogance that usually got people killed in the places Elena used to live. He was the head of the night shift, not because of his skill, but because his father sat on the hospital board. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from her screen. Bed 4 is Mrs. Gable, doctor. She's in radiology. Bed 5 is the abdominal pain you haven't assessed yet. I thought you'd want the priority first. Julian scoffed, snatching the clipboard. Don't think, Vance. It doesn't suit you, just fetch. Beside her, a young nurse named Chloe shook her head. I don't know how you do it, Elle. He's a narcissist. I'd have reported him to HR months ago. Elena's fingers moved across the keyboard with a rhythmic, staccato speed that didn't match her sluggish persona. HR protects the hospital, Chloe, not us, she said, her voice dropping an octave into a low, gravelly tone. Noise is just noise. You learn to tune it out. But Chloe was curious. You've been here 6 months, and nobody knows a thing about you. Where did you work before? You know protocols better than the residents. Elena stopped typing. For a fleeting second, her eyes drifted to the scar on her left forearm, a jagged, ugly reminder of a life she tried to bury. I worked at a small clinic in the Midwest, Elena lied smoothly. Very quiet, mostly flu shots and sprained ankles. Boring, Chloe sighed. Boring is good, Elena whispered. Boring keeps the heart rate down. But Riverbend was about to stop being boring. The red phone on the wall, the direct line to EMS, let out a jarring, mechanical ring. It was the sound of incoming trauma. Chloe jumped. Elena didn't. She picked up the receiver before the second ring. This is Nurse Vance, she said. The softness was gone. Her voice was clipped, sharp, and authoritative. She listened for 10 seconds, her face turning into a mask of stone. ETA, copy, we'll be ready. She hung up and turned to the station. The lethargy of the night shift vanished instantly. What is it? Chloe asked, shivering at the look in Elena's eyes. Multi-vehicle collision on I-5, Elena announced, her voice cutting through the ER noise like a blade. She stood up, and for the first time she seemed 6 inches taller. 3 incoming, 1 critical male, 30 years old, pinned for 40 minutes, hypertensive, tachycardic. They're calling a code trauma. Dr. Julian Vance wandered back over, looking annoyed. I determine if it's a code trauma, Vance. What are the vitals? BP 80 over 40, pulse 130, shallow respirations, Elena recited without looking at a single note. He has penetrating chest trauma. He's a Marine, active duty. Julian rolled his eyes. Great, a hero complex. All right, prep trauma 1. Chloe, get the fluid warmer. Vance, you stay out of the way. Handle the paperwork. Elena watched him go, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then she relaxed. She didn't walk to the desk. She walked toward the trauma bay. She knew that BP. She knew what penetrating chest trauma meant for a soldier who had been pinned for an hour. It meant chaos. It meant bleeding. And it meant Dr. Julian Vance was about to be tested in a way his father's money couldn't fix. The doors burst open with a pneumatic hiss, admitting a gust of cold, rain-soaked wind and the frantic shouting of paramedics. Move, move. On the gurney lay a man who looked less like a human and more like wreckage. His desert camis were soaked dark red. His face was the color of wet ash. Patient is Jackson Miller, Sergeant USMC, the lead paramedic shouted. Impaled by rebar, he blew a pupil on the ride over. Dr. Julian Vance stepped up, snapping on his gloves. All right, get him on the table, on my count. 1, 2, 3. The Marine groaned, a guttural, wet sound that made the residents flinch. Julian began his assessment, barking orders for chest tubes and blood. Elena stood in the back corner, exactly where she was told to be, but her eyes were scanning everything. She saw the way the Marine's chest wasn't rising. She saw the distended veins in his neck. It's not just a hemothorax, she thought. The muffled heart sounds, the narrowing pulse pressure, it's cardiac tamponade. She took a step forward. Dr. Vance, she said, her voice low but firm, look at the JVD, check his heart sounds again. Julian spun around, sweat beading on his forehead. I told you to handle the paperwork. I'm busy saving a life. He's in tamponade, Elena shouted, her voice booming now. If you put a chest tube in without checking the pericardium, you're going to kill him. He needs a thoracotomy. Julian laughed, a sharp, manic sound. A thoracotomy in the ER? Are you insane? I'm a board-certified physician. You wipe asses for a living. Step back or you're fired. He turned back to the patient. Scalpel, let's get this tube in. Elena watched as Julian made the incision. Blood spurted, dark and venous. The monitor began to beep faster. Then the tone changed. The rhythm went chaotic. Ventricular fibrillation, he's coding, a resident screamed. Start compressions, Julian yelled, panic finally cracking his voice. No, Elena's voice stopped the room. You can't shock a heart that's being squeezed to death by its own blood. Compressions won't work if the heart can't fill. Security, Julian roared, pointing a bloody hand at her. Get this woman out of here. On the table, Sergeant Miller's body jerked with the force of the compressions, but the monitor showed a flatline. Stop, Julian said, his voice defeated. He's gone, it's too much trauma. He is 30 years old, Elena said. She wasn't looking at the doctor. She was walking toward the table. The security guards moved to intercept her, but she shot them a look so terrifying, so full of raw, kinetic violence, that they instinctively froze in their tracks. He is a Marine, Elena said, reaching the bedside. She shoved the resident away with a hip check that nearly knocked him over. And he is not dying today because you are too arrogant to cut him open. Don't touch him, Julian shrieked. I'm calling the police. Elena ignored him. She grabbed a fresh scalpel, holding it not like a pencil, but like a weapon. Time of death, Julian began, looking at the clock. Not yet, Elena hissed. With a single, fluid motion, she sliced horizontally across the sergeant's chest. The room gasped. This was major surgery. This was something only a top-tier trauma surgeon would dare. Elena Vance, the nurse who changed bedpans, just cut a man's chest wide open in the middle of the ER. Retractor, she commanded. She didn't ask. She held out her hand without looking. Chloe, trembling, instinctively slapped the metal rib spreader into Elena's hand. Elena cranked the ribs apart. Her face was serene, even as she reached her hand deep inside the man's chest. What is she doing? Someone whispered. She's cross-clamping the aorta, Julian whispered back, his face turning ghostly pale. He recognized the technique from textbooks he'd never seen used in real life. Elena found the descending aorta and pinched it shut, prioritizing blood flow to the brain and heart. With her other hand, she saw the pericardium, the sac around the heart. It was purple and bulging. Tamponade, I was right. She grabbed scissors and snipped the sac. Whoosh! Dark blood gushed out, relieving the pressure. Beneath her hand, the Marine's heart gave a sudden, weak flutter. Elena reached in and grabbed the heart with her bare, gloved hand. She began to squeeze, rhythmic, hard, manual cardiac massage. Epi, she barked, 1 mg IV push now. Come on, Marine, Elena whispered, her face inches from the open chest. You didn't survive the Middle East to die in a rainstorm in Portland. Semper Fi. She squeezed the heart again and again. The monitor let out a single beep, then another, then a rhythm. Sinus rhythm, a resident gasped. We have a pulse, we have a pulse. Elena didn't stop. She looked up, her eyes locking onto Julian's. Her face was splattered with droplets of blood. He needs the OR, she said, her voice flat and terrifyingly calm. Now, or do I have to finish this here? Julian stood there, his worldview shattering in real time. The nurse, standing over the patient, literally held the Marine's life in her hands. As they wheeled the sergeant out, the security guard looked at Chloe. Who the hell is she? Chloe looked at the trail of blood and the empty spot where Elena had stood. I have no idea, she whispered, but she's definitely not just a nurse. They say you can bury a secret 10,000 miles away, but blood has a way of seeping through the floorboards. Tonight, the hospital administration wants answers, but as the black SUVs pull into the parking lot, it's clear. They aren't the only ones looking for the woman who shouldn't exist. The silence in the locker room was deafening. Elena stood over the sink, scrubbing the dried blood from her cuticles. She didn't use the gentle soap from the dispenser. She used the harsh, industrial scrub, the kind that turned the skin raw. She needed to feel the sting. It was the only thing that felt real. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a sharp crack. Dr. Julian Vance marched in, his face a cocktail of fury and fear. He was no longer the confident surgeon. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost and realized the ghost was holding a knife. What was that? Julian hissed, his voice trembling. Elena didn't turn around. She rinsed her hands, the water running pink down the drain. It was an emergency thoracotomy, doctor. You should have read about it in your 3rd year. Don't you dare talk down to me, Julian roared. You are a nurse. You just violated every protocol in the medical board's handbook. You performed major surgery without a license, without a sterile field, and without my permission. I've already contacted the chief of medicine. You'll be lucky if you aren't in handcuffs by sunrise. Elena finally turned. Her eyes weren't the dull, tired eyes of a night shift nurse anymore. They were cold, grey, and as sharp as a bayonet. The Marine is alive, Julian. If I had waited for your permission, he'd be in a body bag, and you'd be filling out a report on why you let a 30-year-old hero bleed out on your table. Who are you? Julian stepped back, his bravado flickering. No clinic nurse from the Midwest knows how to cross-clamp and yachter in the dark. You didn't even hesitate. You handled that heart like you've done it 1,000 times. Maybe I have a good imagination, Elena said, grabbing her bag and walking past him. You aren't leaving. Julian grabbed her shoulder. In a move so fast the human eye could barely track it, Elena's hand came up. She didn't strike him, but her fingers pressed into a nerve cluster near his collarbone. Julian's arm went numb instantly, dropping to his side. Never touch me again, she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous vibration. I'm going to the cafeteria. I suggest you go find a way to take credit for that save before your father finds out you froze. As she walked down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, Elena felt the familiar itch at the back of her neck. It was the danger sense, the sixth sense developed over 3 tours in the Hindu Kush. She wasn't safe here anymore. The unremarkable mask had cracked, and once people started looking, they wouldn't stop until they found the fire underneath. She bypassed the cafeteria and headed for the hospital's rear exit, needing the cold Oregon rain to clear her head. But as she pushed through the glass doors, she stopped. 2 black Chevy Suburbans were idling in the ambulance bay. They weren't local police. They weren't EMS. They had government plates and tinted windows that looked thick enough to stop a .50 caliber round. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Elena made in a year. He had the military posture that never truly leaves a man, shoulders back, chin tucked, eyes always scanning the perimeter. He looked directly at Elena. Major Vance, the man asked. Elena felt her heart skip a beat, but her face remained a mask of granite. You have the wrong person. My name is Elena. I'm a nurse. The man stepped into the light of the street lamp. He held up a tablet. On the screen was a grainy, thermal-imaged photo of a woman in desert fatigues, standing over a wounded soldier in the middle of a dust storm. The woman in the photo had the same piercing gray eyes. The Department of Defense has been looking for you for 2 years, Major Sarah Reaper Vance, the man said. The Pentagon doesn't like it when its most decorated combat surgeon vanishes into thin air after a classified incident in Kandahar. I resigned my commission, Elena said, her voice dropping into a rasp. Your resignation was never accepted. You were listed as MIA, presumed AWOL, he replied. My name is Agent Miller, National Security Agency. We didn't find you, Major. The hospital's automated insurance flag did. When you used your real social security number to onboard 6 months ago, it triggered a silent alarm. I've been watching you change bedpans for weeks, wondering when you'd finally break. Elena looked at the rain hitting the pavement. I'm done with that life, Miller. I don't want the medals. I don't want the blood. The blood doesn't care what you want, Miller said, stepping closer. That Marine on the table, Sergeant Jackson Miller, he's my brother. I knew he was being medevaced here. I didn't think he'd survive the night. Then I got a call saying a nurse just performed a miracle. He paused, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. You saved my brother. For that, I'll give you a 12-hour head start before the MP's military police arrived to take you into custody for questioning regarding the Sultan Valley massacre. Elena's blood turned to ice. Sultan Valley, the night the world ended. The night she learned that sometimes being a surgeon meant deciding who lived and who was allowed to die. 12 hours, Elena asked. 12 hours, Miller confirmed. But Sarah, you can't run forever. The people who want you silenced for what you saw in that valley, they have longer reaches than the NSA. If you stay in the shadows, they'll find you. If you come with me, we can fight this. I don't fight anymore, Elena said, turning back toward the hospital. I just heal. You did more than heal tonight, Miller called out after her. You showed them who you really are, and in this world, that's the most dangerous thing you can do. Elena walked back inside, her mind racing. She had 12 hours, she needed to disappear again. A new city, a new name, a new life of insignificance. But as she passed the ICU, she saw through the glass. Sergeant Miller was awake. He was intubated, tubes snaking out of his chest, but his eyes were open. He was looking at her, and as Elena passed, the Marine raised a trembling hand to his forehead, a slow, weak, but unmistakable salute. Elena stopped. She felt a tear prick at the corner of her eye, the first one in years. She couldn't just leave. There was a reason she had been at this hospital tonight. There was a reason she hadn't been able to let that boy die. She turned away from the exit and headed toward the records room. If she was going down, she wasn't going down for a massacre she didn't commit. She was going to find the files she had been hiding from herself. But as she reached the corner, she saw Chloe, the young nurse, standing by the nurse's station, looking terrified. "Els, thank God," Chloe whispered, grabbing her arm. "There are men in the lobby. They aren't like those government guys outside. They're different. They're asking for the nurse who worked on the Marine. And they have guns." Elena's hand instinctively went to her waistband, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. The boring life was over. The war had followed her home. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," Elena said, her voice as cold as a winter grave. "Go to the security office. Tell them to initiate a code silver. Lock the doors. Don't look back." "What about you?" Chloe asked, tears streaming down her face. Elena looked at the elevator doors. The light was descending. Level 3, Level 2, Level 1. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do," Elena said, reaching into a nearby supply cart and grabbing a heavy, stainless steel orthopedic mallet. "I'm going to clear the room." A hospital is built on the promise of safety, but when the elevators stop and the shadows start moving, that promise is the first thing to die. They came for a nurse, but they found the Reaper, and tonight, the only way out of the ER is through her. The elevator doors at the end of the hall opened with a soft, mocking ding. 3 men stepped out. They weren't wearing the suits of the NSA or the uniforms of the local police. They wore tactical windbreakers, dark jeans, and the kind of heavy boots that didn't care about making noise. These were contractors, mercenaries hired by the shadows of the Sultan Valley, men who were paid to ensure that loose ends, like Elena Vance, never got a chance to speak. The lead man, a scarred individual with cold, reptilian eyes named Kane, scanned the hallway. He held a suppressed pistol low at his side. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a professional doing a job. "Find her," Kane whispered, "and find the Marine, no witnesses." Elena watched them from the shadow of the supply closet, her breath shallow and controlled. Her pulse was a steady 60 beats per minute. In the chaos of combat, she didn't panic. She entered a state of predatory calm. She looked down at the orthopedic mallet in her right hand. In her left, she held a concentrated vial of succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic. In the right hands, it was a tool for intubation. In her hands, it was a silent executioner. "Chloe, go," Elena whispered, pushing the younger nurse toward the service stairs. "Don't stop until you find Agent Miller. Tell him the contractors are here." Chloe didn't argue. She saw the look in Elena's eyes, the gray ice that had replaced the tired nurse, and she ran. Elena stepped out of the shadows just as the first contractor, a man built like a brick wall, rounded the corner toward the ICU. He didn't see her until it was too late. She didn't swing the mallet like a club. She used it like a piston. A short, brutal strike to the man's throat crushed his windpipe before he could draw a breath to scream. As he gasped, clutching his neck, Elena drove the needle of the paralytic into the soft tissue of his shoulder. In 4 seconds, his muscles stopped responding. He collapsed, a heavy, silent weight on the linoleum floor. Elena caught him before he hit the ground, sliding him into an empty patient room. 1 down, 2 to go. She took the man's radio and his suppressed 9. She didn't like guns. They were loud, messy, and final, but she wasn't a fool. She checked the chamber. Full. "Vance, talk to me," Kane's voice crackled over the radio. Elena didn't answer. She moved through the darkened hallways of the like a wraith. She knew the layout of this hospital better than anyone, every blind spot, every faulty sensor, every closet that didn't lock. She reached the nurse's station just as Kane and the third man arrived. They were standing over a terrified clerk, demanding to know where the Marine was being kept. "He's in the ICU, 4th floor," the clerk sobbed. Kane smirked. "Thank you for your service." He raised his weapon. Crack! The bullet didn't come from Kane. It came from the darkness of the hallway. It grazed Kane's shoulder, forcing him to dive behind the heavy oak desk of the reception area. "Contact," Kane yelled. "She's armed. Shift to Plan B." The third contractor, a younger man with a frantic energy, started laying down suppressive fire into the hallway. The sound of suppressed gunshots was like the rhythmic popping of popcorn, but the results were deadly. Glass shattered. Patient monitors exploded in a shower of sparks. Elena was already gone. She had crawled through the ceiling crawl space, a trick she'd learned while hiding from insurgents in a bombed-out hospital in Kabul. She dropped down behind the younger contractor. She didn't use the gun, she used her hands. A sharp, upward palm strike to the base of his nose sent bone fragments into his brain. He dropped instantly. Kane, hearing the body hit the floor, spun around, his weapon raised. But the hallway was empty again. Only the sound of the rain against the windows and the distant, haunting wail of the code silver alarm filled the air. "Come out, Major," Kane shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "You were a hero once. Now you're just a murderer in a nurse's uniform. Give us the files you took from the valley, and maybe I'll let the girl live." Elena, hidden behind a heavy crash cart, felt a cold shiver. The girl, they had Chloe. "I don't have the files, Kane," Elena shouted back, her voice bouncing around the room to mask her location. "They were destroyed in the fire. You're chasing a ghost." "Then I guess I'll have to kill a ghost," Kane replied. Elena looked at the crash cart. It was loaded with oxygen tanks and a defibrillator. An idea began to form, a dangerous, desperate gamble. She grabbed a bottle of high-alcohol hand sanitizer and smashed it over the floor, creating a slick, flammable path leading toward the oxygen tanks. Then, she took the defibrillator pads and charged them to maximum 360 joules. "I'm coming for you, Kane," she yelled. She kicked the crash cart hard. It rolled across the floor, its wheels squealing. Kane, expecting a person, stood up and emptied his magazine into the metal cart. The bullets sparked against the oxygen tanks. "No!" Elena fired a single shot into the hand sanitizer. The floor erupted in a blue, ghostly flame. The heat reached the oxygen. Boom! The explosion wasn't enough to bring down the building, but it was enough to blow out the windows and throw Kane backward into the wall. The concussive force left his ears ringing and his vision blurred. He tried to stand, but a boot slammed into his chest, pinning him to the floor. He looked up. Elena stood over him, the fire reflecting in her grey eyes. She looked like a vengeful goddess of war. She held the defibrillator pads in her hands. "You want to know what happened in the Sultan Valley?" Elena whispered, her voice a low, terrifying growl. I'll show you what it's like to have your heart stopped and started until you beg for death." "Go to hell," Kane spat. "I've been there," Elena said. "I'm the one who ran the ER." She lowered the pads. But before she could deliver the strike, a voice boomed from the doorway. "Drop the pads, Major, now." It was Agent Miller. He stood there with a team of tactical NSA officers, their rifles trained on Elena. Beside him, Chloe was shaking but safe. Elena didn't move. She looked at Kane, then at Miller. "He's a contract killer, Miller," Elena said. "He knows who ordered the strike on the village." "I know," Miller said, stepping forward. "And we need him alive to prove it. If you kill him now, the truth dies with him. You'll be the Reaper forever. But if you let him live, you can be Sarah Vance again." Elena looked at her hands. They were covered in soot, blood, and the residue of a life she thought she had left behind. She looked at the Marine's brother. Slowly, she set the pads back on the cart. She stepped away from Kane. "He's all yours," she said, her voice hollow. Miller signaled his men to secure Kane. He walked over to Elena and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Sarah. You saved the hospital. You saved my brother." "I didn't save anything," Elena said, looking at the destruction. "I just brought the war to a place of peace." "The war was already here," Miller replied. "You just finished it." As the police and ambulances swarmed the hospital, Elena stood in the rain, watching the red and blue lights dance across the pavement. She wasn't Elena the nurse anymore, but she wasn't Major Vance either. She was something else, something the world hadn't seen in a long time. A survivor. They erased her name, they burned her records, they turned a war hero into a ghost, but they forgot one thing: a surgeon knows exactly where to cut to make the whole system bleed. Tonight, the Reaper isn't saving lives, she's extracting the truth. The rain in Northern Virginia didn't fall, it descended like a heavy grey curtain. Sarah Vance, no longer Elena, the invisible nurse, sat in the back of a non-disguised transport van. Across from her, Agent Miller watched her with a mixture of respect and genuine fear. The transformation was complete. The baggy scrubs were gone, replaced by a dark tactical suit and a rain-slicked trench coat. Her hair, once a messy bun, was now a sharp, severe blade of grey and black. She looked less like a healer and more like the storm outside. "The Pentagon is a fortress, Sarah," Miller said, his voice low over the hum of the engine. "Even with my clearance, we can't get you into the sub-basement where the Sultan Valley files are kept. That black site territory, if we're caught, I can't protect you. You'll be labeled a domestic terrorist." Sarah looked out the window at the passing lights of the Lincoln Memorial. "I died in Sultan Valley 2 years ago, Miller. Everything since then has just been a long walk to the grave. I'm not looking for protection, I'm looking for the ledger." "The ledger?" Miller asked. "The medical logs," Sarah replied, her voice a rasping blade. "In the valley we weren't just treating soldiers, we were treating assets. Private contractors from a group called Aegis Shield. They were testing something, an experimental coagulant that turned blood into sludge. It saved lives on the spot, but it killed the heart 3 months later. I refused to sign off on the trials. That's why the village was leveled, to bury the evidence, to bury me." The van pulled into a secure parking garage 3 blocks from the Pentagon. Miller handed her a decrypted keycard. "You have 60 minutes before the system resets. My brother is breathing because of you, Sarah. Don't make me bury you for real." Sarah didn't say goodbye. She slipped out of the van and merged into the shadows of the concrete pillars. Entering the Pentagon wasn't about strength, it was about the invisible habit. For 6 months, she had played the role of a lowly nurse, a person people looked at but never saw. She knew that in a building of 10,000 people, the most powerful person isn't the general, it's the person carrying the trash or the technician fixing the wires. She donned a blue technician's jumpsuit and hooked a toolbox over her shoulder. She walked through the primary security checkpoint with her head down, her gait slightly slumped, mimicking the exhaustion of a man who had been on his feet for 12 hours. The guard barely glanced at her badge. Server room 4B. AC's leaking, Sarah said, her voice perfectly flat, flooding the floor. Go on through, make it quick. She moved through the labyrinthine corridors, her internal map clicking into place. Every turn was etched into her mind from her days as a high-ranking surgical consultant for the Joint Chiefs. She reached the elevator bank and swiped Miller's card. The light didn't turn green, it turned blue, internal affairs clearance. The elevator descended past the public floors, deep into the belly of the beast. Level B4. The air here was colder, smelling of dry ice and old paper. When the doors opened, she wasn't met by guards, she was met by silence. The Black Archive was a hall of floor-to-ceiling servers and physical filing cabinets for the things too dangerous to put on a cloud. Sarah moved to Terminal 9. Her fingers flew across the keys, bypassing firewalls that would have stopped a master hacker. But Sarah wasn't hacking. She was using the administrative overrides she had memorized 3 years ago. Accessing Project Crimson Tide. The screen flickered. A list of names appeared. These were the victims of Sultan Valley, not just soldiers, but children, civilians, all treated with the experimental drug. And there, at the bottom of the list, was the signature of the man who authorized it. General Silas Thorne, the father of the Marine she had saved at Riverbend Central. Sarah felt a cold sickness wash over her. She hadn't just saved a soldier, she had saved the son of the man who had tried to erase her. The irony was a bitter pill that tasted like copper. You always were too smart for your own good, Sarah. The voice came from the dark corner of the room. Sarah didn't flinch, she didn't reach for a weapon, she slowly turned around. Standing there, bathed in the blue light of the servers, was a man in a pristine dress uniform. His chest was a graveyard of medals, his hair a perfect silver buzz cut. General Silas Thorne. General, Sarah said, her voice steady, I see you're still hiding in the dark. I'm protecting the interests of this nation, Thorne said, stepping into the light. He wasn't holding a gun. He didn't need to. He had the entire weight of the United States military behind him. The drug worked, Sarah. It kept those boys alive long enough to get home. What happens 3 months later? That's just the cost of doing business. My Marine, your son, he was on that list, wasn't he? Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. You used the drug on your own blood. Thorne's face twitched, the mask of the general cracking for a split second. Jackson was dying in a ditch in Helmand. I did what a father does. I gave him a chance. And now he's dying again, Sarah said. The heart failure has already started. That's why he crashed at the hospital. I didn't just fix a wound, Silas. I saw the sludge in his arteries. He has weeks left, maybe days. Thorne stepped closer, his voice a hiss. Which is why you're going to give me the counteragent. I know you developed it in secret. I know you have the formula. I'm not giving you anything, Sarah said, except a choice. She tapped a final key on the terminal. A progress bar appeared on the screen, uploading to Global Press Corps. In 30 seconds, the Sultan Valley files, the Crimson Tide results, and your personal authorization codes will be sent to every major news outlet from New York to Tokyo, Sarah said, unless you do one thing. You're bluffing, Thorne growled. You'd be hunted for the rest of your life. I've been hunted for 2 years, General. I'm used to the cold. Sarah looked at the clock. 15 seconds. The choice is this. You step down, you confess to the medical board, you give the survivors of the valley the settlement they deserve, and in exchange, I save your son's life. The silence in the room was absolute. The servers hummed, a mechanical chorus of judgment. Thorne looked at the screen. He looked at the woman he had tried to kill, the woman who held his legacy and his son's heartbeat in her hands. You can't cure him, Thorne whispered. I'm the Reaper, Sarah said, a dark smile touching her lips. I decide who stays and who goes, but the clock is ticking, Sealers. 10 seconds. Thorne looked at the cancel button on the screen. He looked at the woman he couldn't break. Stop the upload, he choked out. I'll sign whatever you want. Sarah didn't move. Sign first. The confession is already drafted on that tablet. With trembling hands, the most powerful man in the Pentagon signed his own professional death warrant. As the digital ink dried, Sarah hit the abort key. She stood up, grabbing the hard drive containing the evidence. She walked toward the exit, stopping just inches from Thorne. I'll be at the hospital, Sarah said, but don't think this is a truce. I'm saving Jackson because he's a soldier. You're just a ghost I haven't finished with yet. As she stepped into the elevator, the reflection in the brass doors showed a woman who had finally stopped running. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't a major. She was the Storm. They say the hardest surgery isn't the one where you cut the skin. It's the one where you fight the poison in the blood. Tonight, Sarah Vance is performing a procedure that doesn't exist in any textbook, while the men she disgraced are coming to make sure the patient and the surgeon never leave the table alive. The ICU was bathed in the haunting, rhythmic blue glow of the life support machines. Sergeant Jackson Miller looked like a ghost carved from marble. His chest, once broad and powerful, now rose and fell only by the grace of the mechanical ventilator. The monitors showed a heart that was tired, a heart that was being suffocated by the very drug meant to save it. Sarah stood at the foot of his bed, her trench coat discarded, back in her surgical blues. She looked at the lab results she had pulled from the Pentagon's black servers. The sludge wasn't just a metaphor. The experimental coagulant, Project Crimson Tide, was designed to stop bleeding instantly by hyper-accelerating platelet adhesion. But the side effect was a delayed, secondary reaction. The blood began to crystallize in the coronary arteries 3 months later. It was a slow-motion execution. Can you do it? The voice belonged to Agent Miller. He stood by the door, his hand resting on his service weapon. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. The weight of his brother's life was visible in the hollows of his eyes. Sarah didn't look up. She was preparing a specialized IV cocktail, a mixture of high-dose thrombolytics and a synthetic enzyme she had spent her missing years perfecting in a basement lab in Portland. In the field we called this the Hail Mary, Sarah said, her voice a low vibration. It's not a standard procedure. I'm going to use a catheter to deliver the enzyme directly into the aortic root. If I'm off by a millimeter, his heart will shred like wet paper. If I'm too slow, the crystals will break loose and hit his brain. He'll be dead before I can pull the wire out. And if you succeed, then he lives to testify against his own father, Sarah said, finally meeting Miller's eyes. Is he ready for that? He's a Marine, Miller replied. He'd rather die for the truth than live for a lie. Sarah nodded. Clear the floor, I need Chloe in here. She's the only one I trust to hold the line. Everyone else, including your NSA team, needs to be at the perimeter. If Aegis Shield sends a second team, they won't come through the front door. They'll come through the vents or the roof. As Chloe entered, her face pale but her hands steady, the air in the hospital seemed to grow heavy. The code silver from earlier that night had been officially cleared by the police, but the atmosphere remained jagged. "Chloe," Sarah said, "you're not a nurse tonight, you're my first assistant. If my hand shakes, you steady it. If the power goes out, you hold the flashlight. Understood?" "Understood, Dr. Vance," Chloe whispered. The surgery began in the dark of 3:00 a.m. Sarah made the femoral incision with a grace that made Julian Vance's earlier efforts look like a butcher's work. She threaded the microcatheter up through the femoral artery, watching the grainy black and white image on the portable C-arm fluoroscope. "Steady," she breathed. The monitor showed the catheter tip reaching the heart. Jackson's heart rate began to climb, 110, 120, 140. "He's going into tachycardia," Chloe warned. "The heart doesn't like the intrusion." "He has to endure it," Sarah hissed. "Inject the first bolus of the enzyme, now." As the fluid entered the bloodstream, the monitors went wild. The sludge began to break apart, but as it did, it released toxins into the marine system. Jackson's body began to convulse. "Hold him down," Sarah commanded. At that exact moment, the lights flickered. It wasn't a power surge, it was a deliberate cut. The hum of the building's HVAC system died. The silence that followed was terrifying. "They're here," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the fluoroscope screen. Through the heavy double doors of the ICU, the sound of a muffled gunshot echoed. Then another. Agent Miller's team was engaged. "Don't look at the door, Chloe," Sarah barked as the younger woman flinched. "Look at the monitor. We are in the middle of a delicate extraction. If I lose this wire, he dies." The sounds of combat grew closer, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy boots in the hallway. The smell of smoke began to seep under the door. Suddenly, the glass partition of the ICU shattered. A flashbang grenade bounced across the floor. "Eyes shut," Sarah screamed. Bang! The world turned white. Sarah's ears rang with a high-pitched whine, but her hand, trained in the chaos of mortar fire, didn't move. She kept the catheter pinned against the aortic wall. Through the haze of smoke, a figure in a gas mask stepped through the broken glass. He raised a suppressed submachine gun, aiming it directly at the bed. "Pop pop." 2 rounds buried themselves in the wall behind Sarah. She didn't have a gun. She had a syringe. As the assassin moved forward to finish the job, a shadow lunged from the corner. It was Agent Miller. He tackled the shooter, the 2 men crashing into a bank of monitors. The room erupted in a chaos of flying glass and sparks. "The enzyme is halfway through," Chloe cried out, her voice cracking. "The pressure is dropping. Sarah, we're losing the rhythm." "I'm not leaving him," Sarah shouted. She reached out with her free hand, grabbed a heavy glass bottle of saline, and hurled it at the assassin just as he regained his footing. It struck his mask, dazing him for a split second. Miller capitalized, delivering a brutal knee to the man's ribs and finishing him with a point-blank shot. "Finish it," Miller gasped, clutching a wound in his side. "There are more coming." Sarah's eyes were locked on the screen. She saw the last of the crystallization dissolve. The sludge was gone. The coronary arteries were clear. "Withdrawing the catheter," Sarah said, her voice a calm anchor in the sea of violence. She pulled the wire out in one smooth motion. "Pressure." "Stabilizing," Chloe said, tears of adrenaline streaming down her face. 80/50, 90/60, 110/70. "He's back, Sarah, he's back." Jackson Miller's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Sarah, then at his brother bleeding on the floor. He couldn't speak, but the clarity in his gaze told the story. The poison was gone. Sarah dropped the bloody catheter onto the tray. She looked at the dead assassin, then at the smoking ruins of the ICU. "He's stable," Sarah said, her voice trembling for the first time. "But the general won't stop until this whole floor is a graveyard. Miller, get him to the helipad. Now." "What about you?" Miller asked, struggling to stand. Sarah looked at the discarded Elena name tag on the floor. She picked it up and crushed it in her hand. "I have one more appointment," she said. "The general thinks he can hide behind his stars. He forgot that the Reaper doesn't care about rank." As the sound of an approaching Black Hawk helicopter rattled the windows, Sarah Vance walked out of the ICU and into the smoke-filled hallway. She wasn't fleeing the war anymore. She was bringing it to the front door. There is a moment in every battle where you realize the only way to save the mission is to become the target. Tonight, Sarah Vance is trading her surgical mask for a steering wheel and a death wish. The rain is falling, the hammers are back, and the only thing faster than the bullets is the clock. The Blackhawk's rotors whipped the rain into a blinding frenzy on the hospital helipad. Agent Miller and two wounded NSA officers hauled the gurney toward the open bay. Sergeant Jackson Miller was pale, but his vitals were holding. He was the living evidence of a war crime, and he was finally leaving the kill zone. "Go," Sarah screamed over the deafening downdraft. Her hair was matted to her forehead, her tactical gear slick with rain and blood. "Get him to the secure wing at Walter Reed. Don't stop for anything." "Sarah, get in," Miller yelled, reaching a hand out from the chopper. "We can protect you there." Sarah looked toward the rooftop access door. The hinges were already buckling under the weight of the men on the other side. Aegis' shield wasn't done. If she got on that helicopter, they'd bring it down with a shoulder-fired missile before it cleared the city limits. "They want the drive, Miller, and they want me." Sarah pulled the encrypted hard drive from her pocket and held it up. "If I'm on that bird, you're all dead. I'll lead them east. Look for my signal in 4 hours." "Sarah, no." But she had already turned. She kicked the doorstop out, letting the heavy metal door slam shut and lock. She heard the thud of the helicopter lifting off, the sound fading into the thunder of the Oregon storm. She was alone. She didn't take the stairs. She ran to the edge of the helipad, grabbed a rappelling line left by the tactical team, and plummeted 4 stories down to the parking garage. Her boots hit the concrete with a jarring shock that radiated up her spine, but she didn't slow down. She reached her vehicle, not the beat-up sedan she used as Nurse Elena, but a blacked-out, reinforced SUV she had kept hidden in a rented stall for 2 years. She primed the engine. It roared to life like a caged beast. As she tore out of the garage, 3 sets of headlights swung around the corner behind her. The wolves had picked up the scent. The chase hit the I-5 southbound at 90 miles per hour. The rain turned the world into a gray smear of neon and asphalt. Behind her, the contractors in their modified trucks began to close the gap. Grag, grag, grag. Bullets shattered her rear window, the safety glass cascading like diamonds across the interior. Sarah didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, her mind calculating trajectories and speed. In the operating room, she moved with millimetric precision. On the road, she moved with the same cold, lethal intent. She grabbed her radio, tuning it to the frequency she'd intercepted from the mercenaries. "Target is heading toward the industrial district. Take her out. The general wants the drive recovered at all costs. Dead or alive, it doesn't matter." "Copy that," a voice replied, pitting her now. The lead truck slammed into her rear bumper. The SUV fishtailed, the tires screaming for grip on the slick road. Sarah steered into the hit, using the momentum to spin her vehicle 180 degrees. She shifted into reverse, staring the lead driver in the eye through the windshield. She pulled a flare gun from the seat beside her and fired. The magnesium flare hit the truck's grille, exploding in a blinding white light. The driver swerved, losing control and flipping over the guardrail in a spectacular arc of twisted metal and fire. But there were more. 2 more trucks moved in, flanking her. Sarah looked at the GPS. She was approaching the steel bridge. If she could cross it and trigger the lift, she could trap them on the other side. But she was running out of road. "Sarah, do you copy?" Chloe's voice came through the encrypted comms. She was still at the hospital, hidden in the security booth. "I'm here, Chloe. Tell me the bridge is clear." "The bridge is up, Sarah. They're doing maintenance. You can't cross." "I don't have a choice," Sarah whispered. She saw the gap. The bridge was tilted at a 20-degree angle, rising slowly to let a freighter through. It was a suicide jump. "Sarah, don't!" Chloe screamed. Sarah ignored her. She floored the accelerator. The engines screamed in protest as the needle climbed. 101, 10, 120. The gap between the bridge sections was widening. Behind her, the mercenaries realized what she was doing. They slammed on their brakes, their tires smoking as they skidded to a halt. They weren't paid enough to fly. Sarah's SUV hit the incline. For a heartbeat, there was no sound, no rain, no engine roar, just the weightless silence of the void. The vehicle cleared the gap, slamming onto the descending side of the bridge with a bone-shattering impact. The airbags deployed, filling the cabin with white dust. The SUV skidded for 50 yards before slamming into the concrete pylon. "Silence!" Sarah groaned, her head throbbing against the deflated bag. Blood trickled down her face from a gash on her hairline. She looked back across the river. The mercenaries were stranded on the other side, watched the freighter move slowly through the gap. She had won, she had the drive, she had the distance. But as she tried to open the door, she felt the heat. The impact had ruptured the fuel line. A small, hungry blue flame was licking at the edge of the hood, and her legs, they were pinned under the crumpled dashboard. "Chloe," Sarah rasped into the radio, "I'm stuck. The car is on fire." "I'm calling the fire department. Hold on, Sarah. Please hold on." Sarah looked at the hard drive. If she died here, the drive would melt. The evidence against General Thorne would vanish. The Reaper would die a nameless criminal in a burning wreck. She looked at her legs. They were crushed, the pain starting to drown out the adrenaline. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver scalpel she had carried since her first day in med school. She looked at the flames. They were growing higher, dancing on the windshield. "I'm not a ghost," Sarah whispered to the empty car, "and I'm not done yet." She took a deep breath, gripped the scalpel, and reached down toward her own trapped limbs. To save the truth, she had to perform the one surgery she never thought she'd have to do. She had to cut herself free. They say a surgeon's hands are her life, but tonight, to save the truth, the Reaper has to use those hands for something other than healing. The fire is closing in, the shadows are watching, and the man who started this war is finally stepping out of his limo to see the end of his greatest mistake. The pain was a white-hot spear through her consciousness. Sarah's legs were pinned beneath the dashboard, the metal twisted into a jagged vise. She could feel the heat melting the soles of her boots. The fuel line was a ticking clock. She looked at the scalpel. This wasn't a surgery for a patient. This was a desperate carving for survival. With a jagged breath, she reached down. She didn't cut bone. She cut through the thick, tactical fabric of her suit and the synthetic insulation of the dashboard, slicing away the barriers until she could find the leverage. With a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated willpower, she braced her shoulders against the seat and pushed. The metal groaned. Her skin tore, but as the fire licked the glass of the windshield, she felt the release. She dragged herself out of the passenger door just as the first window shattered from the heat. She hit the wet pavement of the bridge, rolling away as the SUV vanished in a secondary explosion that shook the very foundations of the steel bridge. Sarah lay there for a moment, her face pressed against the cold, wet asphalt. The rain felt like a blessing. She was alive. But as she looked up, the rain wasn't the only thing falling on the bridge. The heavy thud of a car door closing echoed through the fog. A silver limousine sat idling 50 yards away, its headlights cutting through the smoke like the eyes of a predator. Two men in black tactical gear stepped out first, rifles raised. Then, the back door opened. General Silas Thorne stepped onto the bridge. He didn't look like the man from the Pentagon anymore. He had discarded his dress tunic. He wore a heavy wool coat, his silver hair dampened by the rain. He looked at the burning wreck of the SUV, then at the woman shivering on the ground. "You should have stayed a nurse, Sarah," Thorne said, his voice carrying over the crackle of the flames. "You were good at disappearing. You could have lived a long, quiet, unremarkable life." Sarah struggled to her knees, her breath coming in ragged hitches. She reached into her inner pocket. Her fingers closed around the encrypted hard drive. It was hot, but intact. "I tried quiet, Silas," Sarah rasped, spitting blood onto the pavement. "But your son started dying, and your contractors started shooting. You don't get to choose when I stop." Thorne walked closer, stopping just outside the circle of heat from the fire. "My son is safe. My men told me the helicopter reached the secure zone, but the evidence you carry, that is a threat to national stability. It dies tonight. And unfortunately, so do you." "National stability?" Sarah let out a harsh, dry laugh. "You mean your legacy? You mean the billions in Aegis Shield stock your family holds? You didn't save those soldiers, Silas. You used them as lab rats." Thorne's eyes went cold. "I made them better. I made them survive wounds that would have ended them, if there were complications. It was a small price to pay for the future of warfare." "I am the complication," Sarah said, standing up fully, though her left leg trembled violently. Thorne signaled to his men, "Take the drive, burn the rest." The two mercenaries moved forward, their boots clicking on the metal grate of the bridge. Sarah looked at them, then at the railing. Below her, the Willamette River was a churning black abyss. "You think I came here to hide?" Sarah whispered. She didn't reach for a gun, she reached for her belt. She pulled out a small, high-frequency distress beacon, the one she had told Agent Miller to look for. She thumbed the switch. A piercing, electronic hum filled the air. "What is that?" Thorne demanded, his composure finally slipping. "That's the sound of the truth being broadcast," Sarah said. "The drive isn't just a storage device, Silas. It's a transmitter. The moment I hit this beacon, the files started uploading to the NSA's mainframe. Agent Miller is watching the data crawl across his screen right now." Thorne's face turned a sickly shade of gray. "Kill her now." The mercenaries raised their rifles. Crack! The shot didn't come from the bridge. It came from the sky. A red laser dot appeared on the chest of the lead mercenary. A split second later, his head snapped back as a high-caliber round found its mark. The second mercenary turned to fire at the darkness, but he was cut down by a burst of suppressive fire from the river below. A tactical fast boat roared out from under the bridge, its deck mounted with a M240 machine gun. At the same time, the roar of a Black Hawk returned, descending from the clouds like a vengeful hawk. Agent Miller leaned out of the chopper, a megaphone in his hand. "General Thorne, stand down. We have authorization for lethal force. The Secretary of Defense has seen the files." Thorne stood frozen, the rain soaking through his expensive coat. He looked at the helicopter, then at the silent boats, and finally at Sarah. Sarah Vance walked toward him. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't need one. She held the hard drive in her open palm like a heart she had just harvested from a chest. "It's over, Sealers," she said. "The Reaper is done with you." Thorne looked at the swirling water below the bridge. For a moment, it looked like he might jump, a final act of cowardice to escape the judgment of the world. But Sarah grabbed his arm. Her grip was like a steel trap. "No," she hissed. "You don't get the easy way out. You're going to sit in a cell. And every day you're going to remember that a nobody nurse was the one who stripped you of your stars." As the tactical teams swarmed the bridge, zip-tying the general and securing the scene, Agent Miller dropped down from the hoist. He ran to Sarah, catching her just as her legs finally gave out. "We got it, Sarah," Miller whispered, holding her steady. "The upload is complete. My brother is in recovery. The Pentagon is being purged as we speak." Sarah looked at the burning wreckage of her car, the orange flames finally dying down in the heavy rain. She felt the weight of the last 2 years falling off her shoulders. The ghost was gone. The war was over. "Is he going to be okay?" Sarah asked, her voice fading. "Jackson, he's asking for his surgeon," Miller smiled. "He says he wants to thank the woman who touched his heart." Sarah leaned her head against Miller's shoulder, her eyes closing. Tell him I was just doing my job." They tried to bury her in silence, but she spoke in the language of survival. Tonight, the courtroom is empty, the hospital is healing, and Sarah Vance is finally stepping out of the shadows. But as one story ends, a new one begins, because a hero never truly retires. They just wait for the next flatline. 3 months later, the sun finally broke through the stubborn clouds over Washington, D.C. Inside a high-security military courtroom, the air was cold and smelled of old wood and floor wax. General Sealers Thorne sat at the defense table. He was no longer wearing his medals. He wore a plain, dark suit, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his own stars had finally crushed him. Across from him, a row of prosecutors laid out the evidence, the hard drive, the medical logs, and the testimony of the survivors of Sultan Valley. The doors at the back of the room opened. The room went silent as Sarah Vance walked down the center aisle. She wasn't wearing scrubs, and she wasn't wearing a tactical suit. She wore her full dress blues, her rank as major restored, her chest adorned with the silver star and the purple heart. She walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the steel bridge, but her head was held high. She didn't look at the cameras, she didn't look at the press, she looked directly at Sealers Thorne. As she took the stand, her voice didn't shake. She told the story of the sludge, the experimental trials, and the brave men who had been treated as disposable assets. She spoke for the ones who couldn't speak for themselves. When she finished, the silence in the courtroom was a heavy, physical thing. The verdict was swift. General Thorne was stripped of his rank, his pension, and his freedom. As he was led away in handcuffs, he stopped in front of Sarah. "You destroyed everything I built," he whispered, his eyes full of a broken, bitter fire. "No, Sealers," Sarah replied, her voice calm and clear. "You built it on a foundation of blood. I just let the light in." Outside the courthouse, Agent Miller was waiting for her. Beside him stood a man who looked younger, stronger, and full of life. Jackson Miller was standing on his own 2 feet, his face tan and his eyes bright. He wore his Marine uniform with a new sense of pride. He stepped forward and snapped a sharp, crisp salute. "Major Vance, thank you for the second chance." Sarah returned the salute, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. Don't thank me, Sergeant. Just make sure you use it well and stay away from rebar. The brothers laughed, a sound of pure relief that seemed to chase away the last of the shadows. What now, Sarah? Agent Miller asked. The Pentagon wants you back. They're offering you the chief of trauma at Walter Reed. You could be a general yourself one day. Sarah looked at the horizon, at the monuments of a city that often forgot the people who bled for it. She thought about the quiet halls of Riverbend Central. She thought about Chloe, who was now finishing her surgical nursing certification. She thought about the invisible people she had spent months working alongside. The Pentagon has enough generals, Sarah said. They don't have enough people who know how to listen to a patient's heartbeat. 1 week later, a new clinic opened in a small, underserved neighborhood in Portland. It wasn't fancy. There were no marble floors or board-certified narcissists, but on the door, in simple gold lettering, it read, Vance Medical, all are welcome. Inside, Chloe was busy setting up the trauma trays. She looked up as Sarah walked in, carrying a stack of files. We have a full waiting room already, Dr. Vance, Chloe said, grinning. Word got out that the best surgeon in the country is charging $20 a visit. Then let's get to work, Sarah said, snapping on a pair of fresh gloves. The familiar sound of the latex snapping against her skin felt like home. As she walked into the first exam room, she saw an old man with calloused hands and tired eyes. He looked at her with a mix of confusion and hope. Are you the one they're talking about? He asked. The one who saved that soldier. Sarah sat down beside him, picking up her stethoscope. She didn't look like a reaper. She didn't look like a major. She looked like someone who cared. My name is Sarah, she said softly, and I'm here to help. The story of Sarah Vance reminds us that the greatest heroes don't always wear capes or stars. They walk among us in the most unassuming disguises, cleaning floors, changing bedpans, and waiting for the moment they are needed. It forces us to ask ourselves, who are the people we overlook every day? The quiet janitor, the tired waitress, the unremarkable nurse. Every person has a story, and some of those stories are forged in fire. Sarah's journey wasn't just about saving a Marine, it was about saving the truth. She had to stop running from her past to embrace the gift she was given. In a world obsessed with titles and status, she proved that true leadership isn't about the badge on your chest. It's about what you do when the monitor flatlines and everyone else freezes. The ghost has found her peace, but the battle for the truth never truly ends. If you were moved by the journey of Major Sarah Vance, a woman who traded her silence for a scalpel to save a life, then show your support. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of honor and sacrifice still matter. Share this video with someone who feels invisible today. Remind them that their strength is seen even in the shadows. And most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have many more stories to tell, stories of hidden heroes, military secrets, and the legends that walk among us. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Who is the invisible hero in your life? Or tell us, if you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have stayed hidden or would you have cut the chest open? I am your storyteller. Thank you for watching until the very end. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who is standing right next to you.